Something hit me this week as I was thinking about our time together today, and it had to do with our talks in recent weeks together. I recall urging you on one hand to slow down, yes, to abide, to rest, right? But on the other hand, last week I asked you, what are your gifts, right? And I urged you to think about those and to develop those. Weeks before, I urged you to pause and to listen. And then last week I said, don't wait for permission to do what you have to do, right? And I realize in some way that oscillating back and forth between these postures, that I may have caused some of you some consternation around what you're encouraged to do and what you might refrain from doing. And so at the very least, I think some of you may have left St. Luke's with some whiplash. And I'm sorry about that. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that as contrary as these postures might be, to rest, to abide, and to listen, to reflect, develop, and do, though they may seem contrary to one another, they're actually different sides of the same coin. Does that make sense? They're the heads and the tails of Trinitarian life. And so when we think about the Trinity, I don't think we should place ourselves in this mode of thinking that the Trinity is a puzzle that we are trying to figure out. Puzzle to be solved. I think rather we are to think about how it is a life to be entered. And that in life there will be times of rest and reflection and abiding. And there will also be times that we must do, that we must develop, and that we must steward. And I think our collect, the collect that's given to us in the beginning of this service, is quite clear that it's an invitation for us to live this particular life, and that we are to worship, right? To give praise, to oneness and unity, not division or hierarchy, not to set those two poles, against one another, but to see how they work together. It says one God in eternal glory and unity. And so today I'm not going to stand before you and try to create this mental Venn diagram of God in a triangle, in a trinity of persons, right? But rather I'd like for us to at least spend a few minutes and just meditate on how we might enter more fully into the rhythm of divine life. I think some of us have heard that this rhythm, is a dance. Richard Bohr talks about that, right? He calls this Trinitarian life a trinity in itself, as that of a divine dance, right? But I think it's a dance that involves a couple of characteristics. I think it speaks to us of balance. I think it speaks to us of unity. And I think it speaks to us of process. If you think about those characteristics in relationship to the Godhead, I think you can intuit that in the life of God there is a balance, right? The Father creates, the Son redeems, the Holy Spirit sanctifies. None of those act alone. None overpowers the other. No one person of the Trinity is more God than the others. Instead, there is a shared glory and purpose that's in balance. And in that balance, there is a unity. God is one. The church has always confessed it. We're going to confess it later on in the Eucharist when we say the Nicene Creed. We believe in one God. That's what we say. We believe in one God, though this God is revealed in three persons. God is not three gods, but one life expressed in relationship to each other. And in that life, in the resting and in the abiding and in the practicing and the doing, there is a process. The church fathers, the Cappadocian fathers as they're known, or as I like to call them, Raz, Naz, and Baz, they likened this process of understanding the Trinity as that of a mutual indwelling, a movement, a love that is flowing, that gives and receives, always in motion, never static, very alive. And so before us is sort of a divine choreography, which models for us, I think, a way of life that pushes back against tendencies where we might isolate ourselves, where we might experience imbalance in our lives, and where we might experience modes of stasis or inertia. Right? When I think about our life, I think about our work, I think about our social life, right? I think about our inner life. Those are all aspects of our life. Our vocation, the way we relate to one another, right? And then this inner life of ours. And so, in our life at work, whether that's professional, whether it's domestic, whether it's in our volunteerism, right? I think there's a tendency sometimes for that part of our lives to become imbalanced. Sometimes we over-identify with what we do, with what we produce. But I think if you are thinking about this divine dance, you might ask yourselves these questions in regards to finding balance in your work life. Are you honoring both the effort and the rest? Are you paying attention to your output and then reflecting upon that? There's a balance in what we do. Is there a unity between your values and your actions at work or in your vocation? And do you notice in that process room for growth, room for learning? And have you experienced repentance in some sense, a turning, right? Becoming closer to God. I think that's important for us to think about in our life of vocation, what we're doing. Because the Trinity reminds us that life is not about domination or mastery or achievement alone, but it's about co-creation, because we are invited to relationship. We are invited into the relationship with God, right? Times of polarization, right? Thinking socially now, in times of polarization, even when there's perhaps some differences within our own familial life, right? I think about how deeply we need the witness of the Trinity in our lives. I think how badly we need the witness of divine relationship in our lives, in our social lives. And that's because, like, our understanding of the Trinity is that God is communion, right? That mutual indwelling, there's a communal bond there. And God's life is not a life of sameness. And so in that, we can recognize that there are going to be differences, right? How do we respond to those differences? It's illustrated in the fact that the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Spirit, but they all live in mutual love. And so how do we give witness? How do we live into that mutuality in our own lives, in our social lives, with those that we've been called to be in relationship to? And so whether it's our families, whether it's our church, or the community as a whole, I think we're invited to live in balance by listening as much as we speak. Or maybe listen more. Jerry Cosby once said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Right? I think also this understanding in our social lives that unity is not uniformity, but communion and reconciliation. Right? So if there's an expectation that, this is the way it's going to operate, we're all going to be the same, then you're going to be disappointed. But if you understand that there are going to be differences, that there are going to be challenges, right? That there are going to be differing of opinions, that we are distinct people, right, in relationship with one another, then that offers you the opportunity for reconciliation and growth and love. And the process of all of that is recognizing that we're all changing every day, and that our relationships will respond to that change. But nevertheless, you're invited to step into that. Right? Nowhere is an imbalance more hidden than perhaps in our inner lives. What I mean by that is, I've had conversations with, I noticed it in my own life, but I've had conversations with people who live entirely in the past, right? And they do that for various reasons, right? It's not just the good old days, but sometimes the past has this power to overwhelm us in the present. I've known people that live so future-oriented that they miss the present. And I've known people that lived lives that are divided, where they're one person at home, they're a different person at work, and they're a different person in their relationships. That mutual indwelling of 3 in 1 speaks to us, I think, about wholeness and our understanding of the Trinitarian life. That's an invitation every day here at St. Luke's. I hope that you are healthy and that you're whole. Right? In relationship with Trinity, we are invited into wholeness. And so as we seek to grow in spiritual maturity and in faith, we might ask ourselves these questions. Is there balance between my mind and my body and my spirit? Is there a unity between who I am before God and others? And am I allowing God to work through the process of sanctification, even when it's slow? Because I don't know about you, but I want it now. You got to have fun with it, friends. The Trinity doesn't demand perfection of us. I think what the Trinity does for us in this life is it invites us into the space for us to become and continue to become that which we receive, right? And it invites us into a deeper understanding of who we are as God's beloved children. There are a ton of reasons why you probably have chose St. Luke's. I'd love to know it. one of the things that I love about St. Luke's, and in particular this way that we sort of practice our faith together, is that the church, in the church's wisdom, has given us a pattern to follow, to sort of develop or understand this relationship more concretely. You probably heard me talk about it. It's the threefold pattern of prayer, right? That can refer to the daily office, to devotion, personal devotion, and Eucharist, but it also can refer to praise and petition and presence, right? And so living into this particular kind of witness, this denominational, this Trinitarian life, however you want to label it, you have a regimen within the framework of this church to train yourself into these associations, to understand this mutual indwelling. And just think about it. We often praise the Father, right? We petition the Son. You ask things of God, usually you're speaking to Jesus in some respect. I mean, that's just something that I'm guessing. But most often we come to the feet of Jesus, right? And I think when we experience presence in our spiritual lives, that's the movement of the Spirit as comforter, as witness, as guide, as advocate, right? And in that present, we await God's consolation. So each of these things, I hope that you've reflected on this, are at work in your life. And when you pray in this way, when you praise, when you petition, when you understand and feel that presence, that is you joining in this sort of divine movement. Like, you don't have to do the whole daily office. You can flip that bad boy open and just do the Lord's Prayer, but you're still participating, right? I think it's like getting out on the dance floor. The more and more we participate, the more and more we're swept up in that dance. And so, friends, perhaps that's enough for Trinity Sunday. I don't want to go on. The Trinity is not a concept to be mastered. It's a life to be lived. I think I probably just should have said that and sat down. The reality is that what we've done today, I think, in listening and in speaking to one another and in participating in the liturgy, we've realized that we've been given a gift in this Trinitarian life, and that it's a bright diamond. And then when we pause to think about it, we're looking at a single facet. I wonder if doing so more often, we might see how it catches the light in our own lives.